Griffin. Welcome to Different Take Podcast. Apologize for my voice today. I'm a little hoarse, but if you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. I appreciate you watching. I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. John Eaves, who is a candidate in the Democrat primary for the Secretary of State of Georgia. He's a resident of Georgia for 35 years, lives in Atlanta. He was an entrepreneur, professor, Fulton County, and a former Fulton County Commission chairman. And if you live across the country, that is where Atlanta, Georgia is situated. And he is the former regional director of the Peace Corps. And good morning, sir. I appreciate you doing this.
Bill, my pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I look forward to having a very thoughtful conversation with you and to share my platform, my vision with your audience.
Thank you. And so I'll start with this. What distinguishes you from the other Democrat candidates?
Bill, I'm head and shoulders when it comes to proven leadership experience. You certainly gave a good overview of my professional as well as my political resume. But let me be a little bit more specific. In terms of my political resume, 11 years as chairman of Fulton County government. Yes, it is the county that Atlanta sits, but there are 14 other cities. It's 1 million residents. It's a government of 4,500 people. It's has an operating budget of $1 billion. Has a wide range of services in which I was the presiding officer, provided governance and leadership for. But specifically to this race, two things. Number one is I oversaw the largest local voting operation in the state of Georgia. So we had over 300 plus precincts, a $69 million annual budget. We were the first government in Georgia to do souls to the poll. In other words, people of the faith community encouraging them to vote as well. You know, this includes Christians on Sunday, Muslims on Friday, as well as Jews on Saturday. And then secondly is the economic development component of the Secretary of State's office. I'm very proud of the fact that I played a role as the leader of the county to attract major businesses and companies and corporations to Fulton County, as well as supporting small business ownership in Fulton County. So those are sort of the 99th floor viewpoint of my range of experiences, my proven leadership that distinguishes me from the other opponents in the race.
Okay, I want to ask you a little bit about elections, because I think that's one of the big things in some people's mind. But yes, you're correct that take for granted that you're doing, you be involved in the other things you mentioned. One of the things that I think people have hesitancy about voting by mail, and I'm not sure what you think about voting by mail, but one of the things they have hesitancy, I believe, is the idea that it's not done in secret. Someone else can easily observe, coerce, buy a vote. A friend of mine said, this is a long question, I apologize. The rest of them won't be so long. I had a friend of mine that says, maybe in jest, maybe not, hey, I get 4 votes now. So what do you think about that aspect of voting by mail and whether or not you advocate for voting by mail and that sort of thing?
So Bill, no problem with the question. I think it's fair. I get it asked of me on the campaign trail. So let me just kind of go back a little bit in recent history. So basically 4 to 6, 8 years ago, there was no issue about voting. I'm very proud of the fact that as chairman of Fulton County, I got bipartisan support for, the aggressive style of making voting accessible to everybody, not only physically going to a precinct to vote, but also encouraging people to do absentee voting because it's a legitimate form of voting. Some people just can't go to a physical location. They're out of seas. They may be a college student from Georgia who goes to school at another place. So there's some legitimate reasons for absentee voting because people want to participate, but they physically are not here. And so I think that the whole atmosphere of voting has been poisoned over the past 1.5 to 2 years. It has been poisoned. I'm a Democrat. I think that some of it has been driven by the former president and some folks who embrace his perspective. I will say on the Democratic side, we have perhaps been too focused on voter suppression. And so I believe that there is an opportunity to almost split the difference in terms of going forward. We're going to make sure that everybody, regardless of race, ethnicity, partisanship, should be able to vote and make it easy for them to vote, as long as they are citizens of the United States, residents of Georgia. And so I believe that absentee voting should be an option. There are requirements that have been imposed by the legislature in terms of ID requirements, making sure that you do an application correctly, and that you submit the application within a specific time frame. And so that is an option that has already been there. And now it's been, there's been some restraints or constraints around it, and people should consider doing it, whether you're Black, white, Democrat, or Republican. I do think that the easiest for most people is to do the physical in-person voting. Many people like to go to a specific place to vote, to do anything. And I think that that option will probably in this election cycle still be the predominant option. Roughly 85 to 90% of the people will vote in person.
If I understand you correctly, you do not advocate universal voting by mail.
No, I don't. I don't see any real benefit in that right now. I know Utah, I know Oregon, and maybe even Washington State. They all do it. There's no
California
problem.
does too.
Yeah, so I don't know all the
It's going
states
to
that
do
do it. So I know a few states do it, but I think that we're Georgians, we're in the South, and we sometimes want to do things in a traditional way. But I do think we ought to have in our back pocket the option of doing absentee voting. I think that 2020 was an unusual circumstance where the pandemic truly did make it a preferred option for many people, because they just didn't want to go into places that were crowded. There was still a lot of uncertainty about the spread of the pandemic, but I think that that has subsided. And I will almost guarantee your audience that in the primary as well as the general election coming up this year, an overwhelming majority of the people will vote in person.
So with the idea that, I mean, my understanding is you could always vote absentee with an excuse, but what I hear you saying is everyone should have the option to vote absentee.
I think so. I mean, listen, this should not be political.
I agree.
I think that a person in Raven County who is a Republican who chooses to absentee vote just because that person may not be able to go to the precinct, wherever that precinct is that they're assigned, that person should have a right, an option to vote absentee. It's no real downside to it. I think that the overwhelming majority of the people, absent of the pandemic, will do it in person. And but it should be an option. I think the worst thing to do is to not make it an option, or to make it sound like it's a non-legitimate option. It should be an option.
It does seem though that in the event of my friend, I mean, he has a legitimate, reasonable point, doesn't he? That I can tell my wife, daughters that live with that I get their mail from, I want you to vote for Trump. I want to watch you vote, and I want to take the ballot to the mailbox or the polling location. Isn't that a legitimate concern?
I won't say it's a concern. I mean, to me, that can also happen when you go to a physical location. You know, it wasn't too long ago that we were such a patriarchal society in the South that husbands told their wives how to vote. I'm not saying that that's right, but I'm just saying that that has happened. And the argument that absentee voting makes it susceptible for one person to tell other people to vote, and it does not happen or cannot happen in the physical, to me, that it's not, and for me, it's not logical. We just have to operate on the premise that every one vote per person counts. And everyone at the end of the day has the ability to choose who he or she wants to vote for. And so I'm not going to fall into the argument that that person's was saying to you that absentee voting will ensure that other people will be made to vote just because it's done at home.
Yes,
The
but
overriding, the overriding option is it's convenient, and it's the only option, accessible option for a part of the population that is not exclusively Black or white, Democrat or Republican. It is a population that's there that's probably their only convenient means of voting, and I don't think we should take that away.
you think voting should be just, okay, well, who people vote for should be public?
No, I think we do have the right to, as citizens in the democratic process, have a right to maintain the secrecy of our vote. I just think that that's fundamental, and I want to maintain.
I remember my years ago voting experience was, I thought it was pretty neat that I could go in to the booth, and once I pulled the lever, the votes went away. Nobody knew who I voted for. So yeah, you're right. Someone could take someone to the polls and say, hey, I want you to vote for so-and-so, but they wouldn't know who they voted for. But what I'm hearing you say is you think convenience or that choice is more important than the insurance that somebody's voting in secrecy. Is that correct?
No, so you're saying two things. I'm saying that there should be an option for people to conveniently vote who have no recourse in a physical way. It can be people who are disabled. It can be people who are seniors who prefer, or it will be easier for them to vote in the absentee ballot format. Listen, I don't go to the bank nearly as much as I used to. I do a lot of my banking electronically. I pay my bills electronically. I don't take it to a letter to the post office. And Bill, I also deposit checks using my phone because it's a convenient option. And I believe that it's just easier for me to do it. And I trust the system. I can verify that it was received. So that's one issue. The other issue of the secrecy of the ballot, it is sort of a fundamental American practice in which everyone who votes in an election should have their choice remain anonymous. The individual who votes knows who he or she voted for. You can perhaps get a verification, Bill, that John Doe, who I touched the screen for, whatever, that actually went to John Doe. So I see them as two issues. It's not exclusive of the other. I think that absentee voting should be maintained as an option for people who choose it because of their circumstances. And I believe that when you cast your vote, it should be secret. It should not be disclosed to the public who you voted for.
Okay, what do you think about, should it be legal for political operatives or other third parties to collect ballots and drop them off?
I think that what we need to do is make the process restore trust and confidence in the process. So I would not necessarily push for a third party collecting ballots. I do think that there are options for people to vote already. If you are disabled or have some sort of reason that you can't go to the ballot box, you absentee vote, you have perhaps family members, you may have an identified surrogate who will get the mail, drop it off for you. And I'm not sure if I just said this, you have the postal service. So I do think that right now, the whole atmosphere has been poisoned. And for me as Secretary of State, my number one goal is to reestablish trust and confidence in the process. And so I'll do all that I can to articulate and encourage and push for things that are perceived as manipulative.
So what do you think about the idea of federalizing elections?
It should remain a state process. I do think that there should be general guidelines from a federal standpoint that it ensures some degree of consistency. I do believe that the John Lewis Act, the two legislations that being considered by the Congress, they haven't passed, but I do think that there's some benefit to those pieces of legislation. I do see a benefit in same-day registration. I think that if a person is able to register to vote the day of or the day before an election, I don't see any reason why that person can't vote. I do think that the pre-clearance requirement that was imposed by the 1965 Voting Rights Act was a good thing. And I say that as a county official. When I was chairman of Fulton County, we had to abide by rules and regulations to make sure that people were not inherently disadvantaged by decisions that we made. And so I do think the Justice Department should be an entity that pre-clears any changes that are done in the voting process. So I do see some benefit in some sort of federal guidelines imposed to ensure some consistency across the board.
This has been in the news lately. Do you think the current Secretary of State should disqualify Marjorie Taylor Greene from running for a second term in the U.S. House?
I'm not a fan of hers. I'm not. I think she's purposely doing what she's doing and saying what she's saying because she's speaking to, in my opinion, the worst of our society in terms of what she's saying. However, I think that ultimately the people should decide her fate. And so if I were Secretary of State, I would defer it to the ballot process in terms of people in her constituency deciding whether or not that she should stay in office.
If I don't mind saying, I think it's a very reasonable thing because it would set a precedent where either side that's in power could do the same thing. And I think you're exactly right about that.
And Bill, you're right. Let me comment. You're right. I just think that it's you're going down a path. It's just a path that, once you do it, it can be something that's less egregious, but still is pushed, and then how do you get out of this hole? And so I just think ultimately the will of the people should decide.
It sounds like the ultimate voter suppression. I don't know that the current Secretary of State has said anything about this, but it seems to me this is so obvious that both sides would agree upon that he would be upfront about it. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he has said something. I usually don't put my 2 cents in when I'm doing these, but at any rate, so this is from your website. It says, protect you from financial fraud by empowering you to make viable investments. Could you expand upon that, please?
Yeah, this is really speaking to the senior community. And so one of the many areas of responsibility of the Secretary of State's office is elections, it's the corporations division, it's the licensing division, it's also the securities division. And within this securities division, the Secretary of State actually has the ability to investigate any allegations of improprieties. I'm sounding like an academic here. People who are doing fraudulent things, especially towards the senior community, who are very vulnerable. I'm proud to say I'm 60 years old, so I'm not in the senior community myself. But my mom is 82 years old, and she tells me that she gets calls often about selling her house, doing things with her retirement account. And my mother is a wonderful person. She's still mentally sharp, but she's not the same as she was when she was 40 years old. And I want the senior community to know that if you are being approached, if you're potentially being misled, I will use my office to protect the senior community, because it is a community that is vulnerable.
I also saw on your website, it says stimulate your economy by including diverse companies. And what do you mean by that? If you could go into that in some detail.
Right. I'm gonna always say this, Bill, that the strength of Georgia is its diversity. And we benefit from our diversity in terms of the way our diverse community patronizes businesses, provides cultural, educational, and entertainment value to the state of Georgia. The historical value of African Americans brings to Georgia. But I also think that when it comes to business creation, development, growth, there's a disproportionate number of Black business owners who suffer, who have higher closing rate, failure rates, survival rates than the larger population. I believe that this state will be better served if everybody has the ability to be successful. And so I'm prepared to be available, sponsor programs, support programs for all people who are business owners, who create jobs in our community. But I also want to make sure that there are opportunities for the diversity of our community to benefit from the support that can be provided.
So this kind of just came to me. Being a Democrat, there's a portion of the Democrat Party that they come across to a lot of people as very anti-capitalist. You don't sound anti-capitalist at all to me. What do you think about that? Does that politically hurt you or the Democrat Party because they have that stigma that there's so many people that are so strongly anti-capitalist?
Yeah, that's a fair question. Yes, it is. I think that the Republican Party, I'm going to distinguish the Republican Party from Republicans. So I think the Republican Party has really done a good job of branding Democrats as the enemy. But we are Americans, we are Georgians, we want access to opportunities. We want everybody to have equal access, fair access to opportunities. That's how many Democrats are. Not say all, but many Democrats. That's how I am. Now, let me go back to my experience as chairman of Fulton County. It's a very, very practical approach. I'm thought of as a thought leader, as bipartisan. I was very practical. I made some decisions that supported the business community because I felt that at the end of the day, the vibrancy of the county would be enhanced with strong businesses, large and small. I championed a public-private partnership for Grady Hospital. It was a public hospital. We made it a public-private partnership. I got all types of criticism from some people from the activist community, but they didn't have an answer. That my answer ultimately came to be the right answer, and that hospital is vibrant. So as Secretary of State, I'm a Democrat. I believe in democratic values, but democratic values are not antithetical to what most Georgians want. And so democratic values are fairness, sort of fighting for the underdog. Fighting for the underdog does not mean slaying Goliath per se, just fighting for the underdog. So I have a very practical approach, very pragmatic approach to governance and leadership. And it worked for 11 years as chairman of Fulton County, and I believe it will work as Secretary of State. And I do think that we need to reset in Secretary of State's office. Brad Raffensperger, in my opinion, did a good job in terms of defending the elections in Georgia, specifically Fulton County. I don't agree with some other things that he's done, but I just think that we need some new leadership reset, start afresh, somebody with a clean record, and have a balanced approach. And over time, reinstill confidence and trust in the elections process.
I appreciate you doing this, and you've been very concise with your answers. I appreciate that. I think most people do too. I'm not sure I understood your answer to this question. So I'll ask again, do you think it should be legal for political operatives to collect ballots and drop them off?
So, I mean, the question, and I'm not trying to dance around the question. The question is, what is a political operative? I'm not sure. I do, and I'm trying to really answer this in a fair way. I'm going to say this again. I will not be pushing it because I think right now there's a toxic atmosphere. I'm going to push other ways for people to vote, and other ways for people's vote to be counted. I'm going to push for ways to make it accessible. I'm going to steer from what is perceived right now as lightning rods. So my approach is to avoid the lightning rods and to push for things that both sides can agree on is a legitimate way to make voting accessible. And so I'm not going to say they can't do it, but I'm going to say I'm not going to push it.
Okay, I understand. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Any question I should have asked that I didn't?
I think this has been a pretty thoughtful interview. I mean, it allows me to kind of explain, as you pointed out, maybe in concise ways, my perspective. My perspective, I think, is, I'm going to go back to being chairman of Fulton County, and I assumed leadership in that county when it was very divided along partisan and political lines. And I believe I ultimately got the respect of Democrats and Republicans. So I reverse that, Republicans and Democrats who considered me to be fair. And that over time, the perception of civility and performance as a county government improved under my watch because of my even-handed, consistent approach. And I truly believe that this is needed right now in the state of Georgia, specifically in the Secretary of State's office. So I think you've allowed me to really articulate my side, my perspective. I certainly know that you probably have a more general audience. Some of them may be more Republican leaning than others, but I just want people to know that with my choice as Secretary of State, you're not going to go wrong with me. I think that there'll be reasonable amount of respect and appreciation for my leadership style.
Well, I really appreciate you doing this, Dr. Eaves. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us. This Different Take podcast. Please check out the websites we're on, episodes every Tuesday, Thursday. Please subscribe, like, share, comment. I appreciate you watching. Thank you.